Absolutely. So I met Ken at an evening of Jewish storytelling at Beth Emet Synagogue several years ago, where both he and
Oh,
I were reading stories. And that's actually where I performed the Hadassah Hospital story,
oh, I love
which
it.
was the first one, of that started the Salon. So, and we both, took a look at each other and said, "This is great. We really should talk to each other." And I think your daughter voted mine better than yours, and you were really pissed off.
Of course.
It
And she was right. She was right.
it was a really great evening. So then we became friends after that, and it's quite wonderful. And then he literally does live down the block. Barbara had sent out this biography where she said, and now I live down the block, and that was actually me living down the block. So he's not down the block from Barbara. So anyway, so Ken is a cartoonist for the New Yorker. He teaches at the DePaul University. He's taught at the School of the Art Institute and also at the School of Visual Arts in New York. He has 3 books. I can't wait for the latest one. He's got, his first one is Kvetch Can, a, a whole collection of Jewish, there it is, Jewish cartoons. They're really great. And then the one that he will be talking about today is the Hannah Arendt book, which I have to say is one of the most remarkable things I've ever read. Now, no pressure here or anything, Ken, but it's really the research. I mean, it's a graphic novel, but the research is astonishing, just astonishing. And Ken, I've said this to you before. I think that the whole system of the footnotes and giving information about all the people who you portray, it's. I mean, this is a college level course, just in this graphic novel. And then he's got the 3rd book coming out, which is I forget the name right, the When I Grow Up, the lost autobiographies of 6 Yiddish teenagers. And it looks to be really fabulous, and that's coming out shortly. And he is my neighbor down the block, and I'm proud to call him my friend. So Ken,
Yep.
take it away.
Okay. Well,
And everybody mute if they would. I need to.
great. Well, thank you so much, Barbara and Alan and everybody here. Such a wonderful, one of those unexpected outcomes of this kind of strange time that we've been in. One of those nice things. So I'm delighted to be here. And I really, from looking at some of the previous talks that you guys have had, I understand I'll do a presentation for a little bit, and and then if it gets boring or you have, please be provocative. If there was one thing that Hannah Arendt was all about, it was about being provocative. And this is what I use in my class. This is a safe space, so we should have a nice discussion. Please, any questions that you have toward the end, we'll open it up. But let me share my screen and walk you through a presentation to get you kind of going. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book, and hopefully this will. Okay, so you see that? Okay, yep. So there she is. Nice photograph of her with the ever-present cigarette, taken at the University of Chicago, where she taught from time to time. Lot to talk about. So when I first did this, a lot of people said, hold on, you're doing a comic book about Hannah Arendt? That's if they knew who she was. And if they didn't, they probably said that too. Hold on, I want to see if I can minimize this silly screen of mine. I can't, so I'll keep going. Hold on, you're doing a comic book about Hannah? This is what I think they envisioned at first, something along these lines. Hannah battles Hitler. The most terrifying battle ever waged. Hitler stacked the cards against humanity, but Daredevil deals the ace of death to the mad merchant of hate. And there she is. Well, actually, no, that wasn't not quite what I was setting out to do. And so this was the book that emerged, The 3 Escapes of Hannah Arendt, A Tyranny of Truth. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. One way to think about what I was trying to do I sometimes call drawing history. And there were a lot of different threads in this, and we'll talk about it, and I'll try and explicate it to you so you can understand what's going on. Thought about comics as a time machine. Now, any kind of reading, any kind of narrative can be a time machine, but there's something special about what we call comics or graphic novels that have a capability to transport you in a different way. So we'll talk about that. One thing that was really wonderful in working with Hannah Arendt, and I hope some of you have some familiarity with her. I didn't have a ton when I started. I was a history major at Grinnell College. Then I studied journalism and advertising at Northwestern master's program, and I'm a certified cartoonist. So that means we know everything. But Hannah, I refer to her as Hannah too, which is not, because I feel like I lived and got to know her so well, and she's so multifaceted. But this was a quote of hers that I sort of kept over my desk as I was working, and I kind of keep it in mind all the time. Storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And it's a really, really important quote for what I do and the kind of narrative and histories that I tell. And I think it really reveals a lot about life. So this is right from the very beginning of the book. I'm gonna dive us right into some of the text before I get into it. So it's kind of how it starts, an introduction. All too human introduction to a life. Too soon, too angry, too smart, too stupid, too honest, too snobbish, too Jewish, not Jewish enough. Too loving, too hateful, too manlike, not manlike enough. What follows is a story of a life of a person called Hannah Arendt, born into a lost world in a lost country in another era, a refugee philosopher thinker whose name may sound familiar. In the end, and in the beginning, remains the question, why did this person, arguably the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, renounce philosophy? And despite that, does her thinking offer a viable way for humanity to move forward? So I posed myself this question, and that's a sketch I made of her when she was young. And you'll note that she's always shown in green. We can talk about that later. So one of the things that I kind of hold to in my work is a little phrase that I've come up with called geography is destiny. But I'm not really talking about geography in terms of a map. I'm talking about geography in terms of where you or where an individual is placed in time and space as geography. So much of who and what we are is where we are. So this is kind of the first, I'm going to dive you right in, sort of the first section of the book, just to give you a sense of how I kind of tell the story based on this, because again, I wanted to throw us right into it. So the sorrows of young Hannah. And here's a picture of Königsberg, East Prussia, 1912. And there you can see, if I can, I don't know where my arrow is, but you can see the young Hannah running in green down the street. Königsberg is a very interesting city. So it is now called Kaliningrad. It's, I think it has the highest rate of alcoholism of any city in the world. And it's a massive Russian Soviet submarine base. And it's very, very difficult to get to. When I was in Vilnius researching this book that's coming out in the fall, I wanted to get there and it just proved to be too complicated. But I had to recreate what it was. And so, I'd been to Amsterdam and it seemed very much like one of those Northern European port cities, very beautiful. So there she is running down the street. And then the first thing is called Step on a Crack. And here she is as a little girl. And I create this image, this cloud. The whole wide world, mama, papa, grandpa, music, birds, plays, pictures, toys, cookies, color, light, sound, touch, and best of all, delicious, delicious stories I could eat till their juice ran down my cheeks. If I looked at something and I loved it, I could figure it out. And if I couldn't totally figure it out, the more I felt it in its wonder and it unfolded. For instance, when Mozart, and it's creating this image of her in her life. And, perfectly on a beautiful window, a rainbow. Mama would revive Mozart, but poor Papa, he's coming back again from the clinic tomorrow. When he's there, sometimes he's in the bright white room with the orange flowers, but sometimes he's in the dark gray room in the oily canvas jacket with chains on it, sweating. Why? How? What? I know the answer has to be somewhere out there in the wonderful wide world. I know it. I'm 5 years old. The streets are 400. I'm skipping home from school and I'm happy. Step on a crack, break Mama Martha's back. Except when one of those new automobile machines starts honking at me. Hey kid, get your head out of the clouds. Did horses honk at Immanuel Kant when he walked down Kaiserstrasse? He's from Königsberg too, like me. And there we see Kant with his head in the clouds. And someone yells, hey Kant, get your head out of the clouds. And a woman goes, that crazy Kant is always lost in thinking. What good is thinking? Chickens are what matters, the people are saying. They probably did, but I got to get home. Mama's waiting with cocoa. Step on 2 cracks, break Papa Paul's back. I'm interrupted by Hans from school, but he's being weird. Hey, you. Me? You. But Hans, you know my name. It's Hannah. You are a Jew, 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 Jew. But I'm Hannah. Yeah, I know Hannah, but my papa says you're really a Jew. Is that good? Jew, Jew, Jew. And he runs away. And she's thinking, and he's yelling, Jew. And she's thinking about this. And this is based on a true anecdote, a true thing from her life. I run home thinking of Mama, who's waiting for me. Mama and Papa are so wonderful. They even take me to these really fun protests. I think there's supposed to be one tonight, I think. Mama always writes about me in her Unsertkind, a diary she keeps about who I am. And the mom is writing, my Hanashka, my sunshine child. I can't wait till I can read better so I can peek at it, but now I'm too sad. Mama, then Hans started yelling, Jew, 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 Jew. Mama, what is it? Jew? Yes, we are Jews. It's a religion, like Lutheran. How? We don't go to a Lutheran church. Mama, is it good, Jew? But Hans said, and the mother says, Hannah, remember, if anyone ever says anything like that, be proud. If one is attacked as a Jew, one must defend oneself as a Jew. Now do your homework. I think I can't see what the top is, but it's something like the spirochete. It says, Papa sometimes knows who I am and sometimes doesn't. He's very sick. Mama has to give him poison. And then I talk about Paul Ehrlich, who actually was another German Jewish scientist who invented the cure for syphilis. So I had to learn about what a scourge syphilis was in these days before the vaccine for it. Mama has to give him poison to make him better. Then for no reason, he falls on the floor and yells in crazy Chinese and foam comes out of his mouth. Here, Paul, Dr. Frank says this will make you better. When Papa's happy, he loves magic tricks. I'm learning some really good ones to make him better. And now he's yelling. I'm making him smile, see? Papa's very sick. Will he get better? We can make him feel better, and I know how. More card tricks. And Mom says, okay, but listen to me. Remember what happened to the little girl who didn't listen to her mama? And Hannah says, her nose grew so big no one could recognize her anymore. And through the magic of comics, we show her with her nose growing big. And Mom says, that's right. If you do card tricks, do not upset Papa. And Hannah goes, gotcha. Okay, Papa, pick a card, any card. Well, that's okay. I'll pick one for you. It was the ace, right? And he's yelling, who are you? Why are you torturing me? Who are you, monster? What devil sent you? Slabamashka, monster. Papa, it's me. I don't know you, monster. There's a strange word I keep hearing grown-ups whispering. So of course I go to the library and look it up in the gigantic dictionary you have to climb on a chair to read. Paresis, a fatal stage of tertiary syphilis caused by sex that includes bouts of insanity. And then we see her father sort of fade away. And she says, and one day, Papa is no more. So that sets up the scene of her early childhood, and her father was suffering from this kind of syphilis that made him crazy. And I just wanted to show that. And then it kind of kicks it off. If I could figure out how to lose this dumb thing. Anyways, this is a quote that Eve Ensler, the writer, sent to me about Hannah, and I'll try and get it. She was one of the most brilliant, radical, truth-seeking humans of the century, or maybe ever. She risked being a pariah and speaking her truth, and this day of increasing politico and techno mind control, she is a doorway. So there was something going on with Hannah. And so let's talk a little bit about the book. What exactly is it? Because a lot of people are like confused. You know, it's a comic, it's a this, it's a that, as Alan said. Is it a graphic novel? You know, is it a graphic biography? Is it a comic book? Is it a comics biography? Is it a documentary? Is it a biopic, a much maligned term? Well, I like biopics. This is from the famous movie. Only Warner Brothers would have made this in the 1930s or 40s. The story of Dr. Ehrlich's magic bullet, that very same Dr. Ehrlich who cured syphilis, starring my friend Edward G. Robinson, star of the Yiddish Theater. They made a whole movie about this guy who cured syphilis. Talk about different times. Patton, another fantastic biopic. Some truth, some lies, but it communicated in a certain fashion. Amadeus, another biopic, if you will, well-researched, to get into the character of these people. But really what I think I was trying to do here was more akin to what Werner Herzog did in one of my very favorite movies called The Gary Wrath of God. And Herzog, the filmmaker, calls what he's trying to do coming at this thing he calls ecstatic truth. And I think only a German thinker could come up with that, ecstatic truth. They seem to contradict, but it made sense to me. But it's what I like to call a time machine. So this is kind of interesting. When you're doing something like this, you have to draw pictures of people. You have to figure out how they look. So in the process, I had to find out how to draw her, like who she was. And there's a handful of pictures of her, like the ones I've seen, and we all have a sense of them. And here she is. This is a very kind of typical picture of her, I would think, from maybe the early 60s. She looks like she's in upstate New York. I know she had a place in Connecticut. A lot of attitude there. So I had to try and figure out how to do it. And I started here and I hated it. I'm showing you rejects. I should have thrown them away, but they had use. Terrible. I couldn't stand it. Couldn't find her. So I did all these scribbles. So then I looked at some pictures of her when she was young, and always a very striking woman. And this is, I think, when she just maybe had gotten out of college, was first married, always holding a cigarette. But, you know, there's just something about her whole style, even the necklace and everything. It's timeless. It's timeless. So then I found this photograph, and, you know, you look and you try and find reference, you know, to help understand what the person might have been like. And I thought this was a very striking image of her. I think she was in high school. And that's not a typical image that you would think of as Hannah Arendt. But, you know, I love the fact that she sort of has one leg, you know, forward and back, and she's smiling. And I'm trying to figure out who this person is from the way they look. Yuck, horrible. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, I couldn't find it, and it had to be a comic. Again, you know, thanks to the internet, you can find all kinds of stuff. And I'm searching for her face. And this was her, she was stateless refugee person for 18 years. And then finally, she came to America and became a US citizen, and with her second husband. So, you know, this is like a photograph that was taken like a driver's license picture. And I was stunned. I mean, she looks really, I mean, whoever took such a good picture for a driver's license picture. I mean, there's something quite amazing about this, that she could defy this. So I'm looking for clues. And this started to open up a way that she might look, okay? Because, you know, I have to get a truth of an image of her. So I tried this, and I wanted to show her exuberance, and I was sort of getting somewhere. And then, thanks to the fact that the librarians in France never seem to throw anything away, this popped up on the old Facebook one day you can see it's from the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris. And it was Hannah's library card from the bibliothèque. They had found it. 1936, something or other, somebody Belle Écriture, whatever. But I was taken with this photograph, and this photograph had never been seen before. And luckily it came out right, January 5th, right when I was working on the book. And I fell into this picture. I just fell into it. Now, at this particular moment in her life, she was in Paris. She had to flee the Nazis in Germany, and she was working as a scholar, but she was also working with this group called Jewish Aliyah, trying to get Jewish kids out. And her mother she was going through a divorce, and her mom was there, and she was going hot and heavy with this other guy, and she looks tired, but she also looks, again, kind of amazing. I'm just leaning into it, like that look off. Here she's looking off. I mean, you couldn't have a great photographer could not have posed this picture better. I think so. All of a sudden, this made, now I could see her. So I did a sketch of her, what I imagined she was like looking at in her Upper West Side apartment, working. There's the radiator. Then there she is, maybe as a young student in Marburg. You can see someone sketched "I love Goethe" into the thing on the side there. But I started to get a sense of who she was. Here she is as a young flapper, in Königsberg, driving around in a Stutz Bearcat, which she was. I mean, this was the 1920s. So I had a sense of who she was. Here now, then it got to the point where I could literally draw her pretty much with my eyes closed, and you can see some of the defining characteristics were the strong eyebrows, the cigarette, the green color, and the general shape of the face. So that was very important. So comics really, in many ways, I feel, are the perfect tool for scraping the barnacles off of history, as I say. I love to read history. I love to read biographies. I love to read, and a lot of people think, oh, history, oh, Abraham Lincoln, blah, 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 and it's very, very hard to kind of look at history in a fresh way. We can talk some more about that. Art Spiegelman, I can say probably the genius author of Maus, and just an incredible guy, said comics are the art of turning time back into space. That's a very heady thing to think about, but I really, really like it. And then Chris Ware, one of our local Chicago genius, Chris Ware, if you don't know his work, you must look it up. In an interview, I think this was from the Paris Review, said cartooning recreates on the page some sixth sense of space and of being in a body in a way no other medium can quite so easily, or at least so naturally, inducing a sense of movement and sound and sometimes even smell. I love that, because we're primarily visual. I think our eyes, and Ware kind of says this too, are highly, highly developed organ. I mean, if you think about it, I often think about this. If you're out on the street and you see somebody who either or you find attractive or you find interesting, and they may be 2 football fields away from you, you can still get a sense pretty much of who they are. Like, we can discern from like the tiniest little spot a lot about the world. This led me to a little thing that I ran in that the New York Times Book Review ran, where I kind of started to ask, like, why questioning Hannah Arendt made me question myself, sort of the biographer's task. Kind of end the book with her, a heroic image of her astride the world in the cosmos, I'm really short circuiting the book. Got to read the book to get it. And she's saying to be alive and to think are the same thing, because she's an extraordinary thinker, complex, but wonderful. And I had to try and embrace all these different powers. And I saw her arc as one of defining a certain type of way of thinking about the world, of using your mind. And after this, I did a little epilogue, which I think kind of sets up some things that might spur some conversation for us. So this is true. So, spoiler alert, the last frame, she kind of dies in her sleep after a nice dinner at her friend's house, Salabaron. And then I wrote, the morning after Hannah dies, the first sentence of On Judgment, her return to philosophy, is found in her typewriter. Mary McCarthy, the author, collects, edits, and publishes the drafts of Hannah's final works, calling them The Life of the Mind. The 3 volumes constitute a field guide to the process of thinking through in the plurality guided public world. She has a real idea of like how we should all get along in the world, plurality. From beyond the grave, Hannah says that although living in the world of plurality and natality, another big word, which is new stuff, like making new things, is no picnic. If we want to avoid Auschwitz or the Gulag or Stonewall or Pol Pot or Attica or ISIS, we as a species have no choice but to embrace it and endure it. In other words, there is no single truth, no silver bullet of understanding to guide us, just a glorious never-ending mess, the never-ending mess of true human freedom. So I was trying to describe what type of a person she was, and there's a little picture of her typewriter with some cigarette butts, which they literally found in her apartment the day on Judgment. And it's a shame that she wasn't able to complete this. She had, there were 2 other parts. So thank you, and I'm going to talk a little bit more because I know I have more time to talk, and you're a captive audience. I want to walk you through a couple of other things to help us get going on our conversation, and I'm happy to take your questions. But if you don't mind, I'll kind of plow through this and see what I've got here. Oh yeah, why do I show this ad for the Roach Motel? Well, I lived in New York City for a long time, and if you did, you rode the subway and you saw ads all the time for the Roach Motel because we had a lot of roaches. Maybe they do in Brooklyn too, or they did. Maybe they got rid of them, like the Chinese got rid of flies, supposedly. But anyway, they had a wonderful slogan: the roaches check in, but they don't check out. Now, why do I bring this up? Because with Hannah, when you start reading her, you check in, but you never check out. I mean, once you start, be warned. They should put a warning label on her work. When you start reading her, you can't stop, because she basically had something pretty much brilliant, not always right, to say about everything. I mean, personally, I feel that although she was a genius of a writer, I think her true genius was as a reader. I don't think anybody ever read as well as she did. So here's some provocations, some things to think about that come out. So one thing that provoked me is like, why did this person, arguably one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, renounce philosophy? I mean, to me, this was an initial, like, she was so brilliant in so many ways. And then at one point she says, no, I'm done. One thing that really intrigued me and what my task was and what I try to do, and I'm working on another book now, which now that this other one is coming out in the fall, I'm trying to get a start on another one. But what's the life behind the thinking? Like in a lot of the books that I read, and people start with the thought, they start with, it's very academic. I was very much more interested in how the life motivated the thought. And then how could you be so freaking cool, to hang out with the likes of everybody from Bertolt Brecht, Walter Benjamin, Marlene Dietrich, Mark Chagall, Billy Wilder, W.H. Auden, Bellow, Randall Jarrell, Mary McCarthy. And these are just a few of the people that, I know this group will have heard of, but there are many, many more. I mean, the people that were in her world. So as Alan said, through the magic of the comic or graphic medium, I could do these footnotes. It's interesting. You either love them or you hate them. I find Americans mostly love them. The British audience, they don't like it so much. But I think we've been weaned on David Foster Wallace, so we know that we have to read all those ridiculous footnotes. And I thought, the David Foster Wallace used to annoy me because of all the footnotes, and so I ended up using them like crazy. It's fun. It's an interesting thought that she had. Man does not inhabit the world. Men do. And then I added in women and children. She came up in a time when it was man this and, these truths, and she's no. Men do. And I think this is a clue to her thinking. Plurality, which she calls plurality, is everything. In the public space, everyone must be heard and respected. Everyone. And this means that equality is a prerequisite to getting together, not a result. And again, what is, a lot of people talk about, what's her method? Maybe we can talk about it. How are we going to get there? But that was very important. Another huge thing I feel in her was that you must face reality. You must face reality. Lies distort reality. They put the finger on the scales of truth. And as we can see, the results are really very disastrous. I mean, we can talk more about this. And, one of the ways I shorthand this is that, life is not Disneyland. I'm sorry to tell you that. And actually, the people who run Disney, the people who at Disney knew that. I mean, that's why he went to the Brothers Grimm, and he went to these sources of dark, Brunel Bettelheim. People talked about it. I mean, the darkness is what makes these tales work. But there are a lot of people who walk around thinking life should be Disneyland. This was a big word for her, pariah, be a pariah. She was very into this concept, be an outsider who sees the truth and speaks it. And among the people that she put into this group of select pariahs, she liked Charlie Chaplin a lot. She put him in there. But it's she's a bit, I had thought at one time of titling the book, The Woman Who Bit the Hand That Fed Her. I mean, she's a little bit like Marlon Brando in that movie when the guy says, what's what are you fighting against? What are you so angry? And he says, what do you got? I mean, she just was like, she didn't ever take anything at face value. And in a, kind of a provocative and controversial way, I believe she gave up her love of a man for her love of the world, but she had love of other men that supplanted that. That's a controversial moment. Let's see, what else do I have, or am I done? That might be it for now. I mean, I can show you more examples and more things, but I'd love to take some questions, stop the share, and see what else you guys might want to talk about, if that helps. Anything? Yeah, sure.
What's the green? She's green and her typewriter was green.
Right. Excellent question. So I was allowed to have one color because, I don't know, they didn't want to pay for a 4-color thing, and that actually made my life easier. So I had to figure out what color I was going to use as a highlight. And I picked green because I had, in some of the reading, believe it or not, she favored wearing green when she was young, to the point that at points they referred to her as the woman in green, which I thought, well, that's okay. So I got to use green. So I started using highlights, and that helped because unlike, say, Charlie Brown, wonderful character, never ages. I mean, you always know who Charlie Brown is, but I had to do Hannah from a little girl all the way up through her whole life. So the green helped distinguish her. But then I started thinking there were some reasons. So green worked, but then I had kind of said to myself, oh, well, green natality, this idea of birth, is a very big thing for her. And I thought, oh, green is kind of like the color of spring, the color of birth, and, you know, plants coming in. And then someone, when I was doing a talk, said, yeah, but it's also in flesh. It's the color of decay. It's the color of, and I thought, oh, well, that kind of works too, because she's very much about this whole cycle. And then I was very fortunate when I did the book launch in New York. Roz Chast, who's another New Yorker cartoonist and a friend of mine, was the one we were being interviewed. And we were sitting in the green room, just occurred to me, in the green room. And she looks at me and she says, green, really? And I said, what do you mean green? She said, you idiot, green is the hardest color to use. I said, oh, why didn't they tell me that? But it worked out. It felt, for all those reasons, the correct color for her. So that's why. And then at the end, so as I had that as something to use in my palette to help push along the storytelling, you couldn't really see it in the piece that I showed. But here, if I share the screen again, I can. So this is the book. And you can see there, the green now migrates from her to the world. So it was a nice additional tool for me to use there. So I'm using a different color for
Interesting.
my next book, but you know, I actually think I like having to use only one color. It's kind of the limitations can help. Yeah.
Ken,
That's
can,
nice.
can you share a page or two that shows those footnotes?
Sure. Let me go to that. So that was really a lot of fun for me to do. It's a PDF of the whole book, but if I go, I mean, let me make that bigger. Where's the thing to make that bigger? Oops. Oh, here. Oops. Why isn't that moving? Oh, I hear. So I had a lot of fun thinking about her. So one of the things about Hannah Arendt was she was born when, you know, horseless carriages were still you know, going over Königsberg, and she died on the Upper West Side after Nixon had resigned and the Ramones had already started playing. So I'm thinking that's a pretty heavy arc of somebody's life. And oh God, sorry. I wanted to show you that little bit on the bottom of that page. So I imagine, what would it be like if she was walking through the East Village when the Fillmore East was there? And you can see, because I wanted to break down the walls of history, and you can see the Grateful Dead and Jimi Hendrix and all this is playing, and she's talking, and I think I mentioned the Marx Brothers in here. So then on the bottom, I would say something like Julius Henry Groucho Marx. So everybody, and then here, if I go back, sorry, this is so unwieldy. There you see her speaking to the Philosophy Society in the green. She was playing at the same time. She was working at the same time as John Coltrane was playing. So I was really trying to put her in the context of her times. But I think, Alan, what you're referring to is in the early parts of the book,
Right.
when
When you're describing who these people are.
right, when she's like she's in a salon in Berlin. I mean, here's one.
Yeah.
Let's see. I mean, for example, she goes to a party and mention Mark Rothko. So I talk about, you know, Mark Rothko, I list of dates, American Jewish painter who, despite his scholarship to Yale, dropped out, finding the community elitist and racist. His color fields defined a mystical trend. So I can do that. Born Marcus Yankelovich Rothkowitz, Saul Bellow. And then sometimes when I was doing those people, it gave me an opportunity to get a little funny or snarky with them. Like, so for instance, when I introduced Albert Einstein, everybody knows him. So I just said, you know, Jewish scientist who changed the universe forever, you know, and sometimes I would, so this was the place in the narrative that I could break the fourth wall, if you will. And if I can figure out how to stop sharing the screen after all this, there we are. That was a really fun thing to do. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to lay into those as much in the next book, but I'm going to do it a little bit.
What I thought was so remarkable about it, Ken, was that you took really complicated stories of people and their beliefs, and in a sentence, you distilled what they were all about. And this happened not once or twice or three times, but like 20 or 30 or 40 times. And it just went, whether it's
Well,
philosophers or artists or musicians, that to me was just unbelievable.
well, thank you. I mean, and for me, it was kind of like when I do this type of a thing, I'm teaching myself, you know, I like to teach. So when you know, I didn't know that much about Hannah Arendt, quite frankly, when I went in. I mean, I was a history major. I took some philosophy classes. I listened to NPR, you know, and then I didn't even really know that much about the Heidegger incident, to say the least. And I had to try and solve it. But I did know that I loved, you know, the movies of Fritz Lang and a lot of German expressionist art. And I found that a lot of the things that I really loved all kind of circled around Hannah Arendt.
Hmm.
So this Weimar Cafe Society, where she used to go to this place called the Cafe Romaniche, which when I was in Berlin a year or so ago, I had to go try and find. It's now a KFC. But nevertheless, at least I was able to go in the vicinity of where it was, and there's a bombed out cathedral that has been left right next to it. But the people who were in that world, Alan, it just, you know, you had W.H. Auden, you had Christopher Ishwood, you had Alfred Hitchcock, who was working at you know, at the film studios there. You had Marlene Dietrich, you had, I mean, everybody, I mean, the vibrancy of the Weimar and the decadence, but the vibrancy of the Weimar culture was unbelievable. So it was like candy for me. And I was learning about new people all the time. You know, he was a curator of photography, would know about Hannah Hoke, who was the first collage artist of magnitude, like that I never heard of. And so it was this incredible ferment. And so I had a lot of fun, you know, creating, it was part of the world, you know. And another thing that, you know, and I don't necessarily, I mean, I could, but I didn't necessarily want to go through the whole business of it now, but that made this kind of fun for me was that by using graphic novels, you can diagram thoughts that are, well, I will share something else with you because, you know, I'll walk you through one more scene. Let me see if it's on, if it's, I wanted, oh, here, I think it's, I had broken it down and it's on my desktop somewhere. Just forgive me for a second, because there's a very, so she was very connected to Walter Benjamin. And I didn't really know, you know, I love Benjamin, and I was taken by, I found some, you know, part of the research was so fascinating, and I found, I can't find it right now, but there's a thing where she has to talk about, oh, here it is. I'll walk you through this. So Benjamin was a huge influence on her. And I wanted to show, okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. I had this all laid out, but you'll bear with me. I read the correspondence of Walter Benjamin and Gershom Scholem when they were high school kids, and they were smart high school kids. They were talking about stuff that I didn't really think about when I was in high school, like the origin of language. But nevertheless, that was very important to this. And Hannah hits a wall in her thinking, and I wanted to show how she got around it. So this, by the way, let me show you this. This is a very interesting photograph. You can see this. This gives you an idea of the world that she was in. This was one of the, I didn't use many photographs in the book, but I had to use this one. You can see her. This is a portrait taken, I think, either at the University of Chicago or Princeton or Oxford or something. And she's the only woman amidst all these guys in like suits and ties, and there she is, and she's sitting in the front, and interestingly, again, casting that leg forward, and she's got this confident look. So I circled her in the green. And I felt that there were so many things she was wrestling with as a woman in this era, just, you know, and a woman in Germany, just incredible. Had broken this scene down. Okay, I'm going to try and show this to you. Let me move this off to the side. I wish I could figure out. So I call this scene, make this bigger. Oh, I didn't want that. That's my new book. I didn't want to show you that right now. Here. So I'm sorry, it's kind of broken up. It's better to read in the book, but I call it Walter Stain. I lived in an Upper West Side apartment, and we always had water stains on the ceiling. But I found out that the way she worked, she would sit on a couch and stare at the ceiling. So I'm trying to describe how she learned. So she goes, origins let us move to a much nicer 5-room, 2-bath apartment with a doorman. And it's here that I decided to set up my efforts to correct why the abyss happens. When they find out about the Holocaust, nobody will believe it. Nobody will believe it. And even her husband, her second husband, says, this makes no sense. Why would they waste all that war material doing this? I mean, they're going to lose the war. And then when it was proven, Hannah said it just changed the world. She said an abyss opened up. Like there was before and after. Tradition was shattered. So I had to figure out how she wrestled with this. Oh, I'm so sorry. So she's laying on the couch. The abyss is real, and she's arguing with herself. Yes, but we're still in the world, but in a new place. How did we get here? Why? Yes, why? So I'm showing the development of her thought by showing her argue with herself. And what happens is, darn thing, so clumsy. I want to get to this next page. Oh, it's this here. So she's lying on the couch. Oh, I'm really sorry. I'll have to find the other one. Okay, I can describe what happens. She's lying on the couch and she hears a voice. And she looks up and it's a water stain and it's in the shape of Walter Benjamin. And they have an argument. And he's saying, don't you get it? And she says, I'm just trying to find the truth behind language. He says, there is no truth behind language, which is what there is no truth. Language is it. Like, she says, what are you talking about? So she's having an argument. And then she goes, what am I doing? I'm having an argument with a water stain in the shape of Walter Benjamin. I must be losing my mind. And then she says, I must have had something bad in the whitefish salad at lunch. And then Benjamin says, stop trying to dodge the issue. Because in her mind, one of her big things about philosophy was we in thinking we should never be alone. She said there's a difference between being lonely and being solitary. And you can have a conversation with yourself. So she's having a dialogue with herself, but it's with Walter Benjamin. So I could show that. So using pictures in this graphic form, I could demonstrate these different battles and these different ways that she kind of wrestled with her thinking. And like any biographer, I had to make it a story that would be interesting. Like there had to have a beginning and she had to have a search. She had to be looking for something. And this gets back to that thing I talked to you about in the opening. And I didn't want it to just be like, oh, she was a lonely girl looking for a father figure because her father died when she was young. But you don't have to look very far into the actual biography to find out that that was not who she was. Because two amazing things happen when her father passes away. One, and it's all in the record, she goes to her mother and she says, Mom, it's going to be okay. Relax. You know, basically, you know, shit happens. We'll get on with it. She's counseling her mother. And then she says, oh, and by the way, could you grab me Dad's book on Immanuel Kant? Because I want to start reading. And she plows through all of Kant. And then she teaches herself ancient Greek and she starts putting on Greek tragedies. This is not your typical 11, 12-year-old. May have been in Germany at that time. So but her goal that I think, you know, the story was she wanted to understand the world. She wanted to understand. And that was what I saw as her mission. And, you know, she said she lived through dark times, and she did. And she made some mistakes. It's not a hagiography. But, you know, when I was talking to Barbara, I thought this would be an interesting point because I try and, you know, like the Roach Motel analogy, I try and often think, what would Hannah say? What would Hannah do? What would she say? What would she say about Twitter? What would she say about Mitch McConnell? What would she say about cancel culture? What would she say about almost anything that comes up in society? I ask myself. So I was talking to Barbara, and we were talking about this notion of plurality, radical plurality, and that you have to let everybody into the tent, and you have to. And the way I describe it is like you have to listen to everything that they say, but they have to listen to everything you say. And I think drawing that line from at what point can you not, or should you not, like with Eichmann, at what point is evil unforgivable? Very, very trying. And Barbara said something to the effect, and I don't want to misquote you, but you said something like, but what if people are saying they want to kill me? You know,
my statement was I'm open and supportive of everybody's religion and philosophy as long as they're not trying to kill me and my family.
Right. And how do we, you know, and I don't know if there's an easy answer. How do we make this program actionable in the world where it's a really, you know, messed up, you know, world? And one of the ways I think that she tried to do it was just tell the truth as best that you can. There is no one truth, but everybody should just be throwing down. And of course and there were contradictions. So that little quote that I had referenced that her mother said to her, if one is attacked as a Jew, one must defend oneself as a Jew. I mean, the whole question of how she would relate to identity. You know, there are a lot of things that came out of her life that are hard for us. And she came sometimes out on the wrong side of things, but there were contradictory things. So when the war started, World War II, she advocated for a worldwide Jewish army to attack Hitler. she said that we Jews should raise an army to fight to kill Hitler. And that didn't go over very well. But she said that he wants to kill us, so we should try and kill him. And yet, could she have him come to the table? You know, is there, I don't know, Barbara, I don't want to speak for you, but I mean, in my mind, it's like, would you allow him to come to the table and have a conversation with you? Could you have
No.
a conversation with him?
Absolutely not.
Right.
I mean, there are certain invasions of who and what I am and what I believe that really I don't want to spend time with those philosophies and those people. I mean, one of the nice things about having reached my age is I don't have to be open to everybody. And I don't have to believe everything other people believe. It's too big a world. It's too big a philosophy. That's why this group is so marvelous, because in this microcosm, we discuss a lot of things. We don't always agree with each other, but I don't have to go very far afield. And I used to, when I was traveling a lot, and the sacred mountain to the Maasai is Mount Meru in Kenya. And if the Kikuyu or the Maasai believe that that's the sacred mountain and that's where God lives, fine with me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say, Barbara, what you are saying and what you are doing with this group, and I was thinking about it. I mean, may 1,000 of these be formed. You let a million of these little groups happen face to face everywhere. You know, let people in the South, you know, I think it's about people talking to people and showing their faces, you know, showing up, talking, disagreeing, agreeing. I don't know. I agree. You can't solve the whole world. You can't listen to everybody, but it's so, you know, and then I've been reading some other stuff and I'm thinking like, well, was she just like one of these, you know, idealists, you know, oh, this is just, you know, this is how it should be. And I'm not going to tell you how to get there. Or is it actionable? You know, so many of the things that she says, I just pulled this out as I try to figure it out. She says there are no dangerous thoughts. There are no dangerous thoughts for the simple reason that thinking itself is a dangerous enterprise. But I believe non-thinking is even more dangerous. And we have a lot of people, if you have to talk to other people, I'm not saying, you know, yeah, but I mean, there are a lot of people out there who don't think.
No kidding.
Yeah, but
Shama?
I'm sorry, thank you, Barbara. You were going to finish something, Ken? Didn't mean to
no,
interrupt.
I just, you know, how people, she believes, I think, and this is really, really difficult, that everybody is capable of being a free and independent thinking person.
And I would disagree totally, but she is a brilliant philosopher. And with that point, I absolutely do not agree.
You don't agree that everybody's capable of being a thinking person?
No, I think they're programmed. I think it's how we've gotten to today and the far right. That's programmed.
Well, you know, I mean, what about, I remember when I was in New York or somewhere, or even when Ronald Reagan got shot and then that guy who was Ronald Reagan's chief of staff, who was a really far right-wing guy, got it really bad. And then his wife like switched, and all of a sudden she was like, well, no, I'm not pro-gun anymore, or something like a lot of times when it touches you, people can change. I'm not saying, I mean, she talked a lot about, you know, empathy or not thinking from the point of view of the other person. And um, I think what she's saying is the stakes are too high. I mean, I'm not that for us to not, uh, I mean, I don't know.
I studied psychodrama for years, and one of the pillars of it is being able to role reverse and become the other person and experience that. And there's some very scary places to role reverse and very frightening states of mind. There were many times I was very happy to come back and be myself.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember going into, I don't know if you guys are, those of you who are, and I'll get to you in a second,
That's fine.
nourishment projects. I'm not sure what your name is, but
Shoma,
show.
Change my
Oh, that's a
name.
better name. So those of you, if you're ever in Chicago or if you come to Chicago, you must go visit this incredible bookstore they have called Quimby's up on North Avenue. It's probably the best graphic novel and comic store in the country.
Anthony, next time you're in.
Oh yeah, you got to go there. And the woman who runs it is sort of a friend of mine. And when my book was coming out, I was saying, wow, you know, can you believe it? You know, there are a lot of people who've never read a graphic novel before. And she said, I don't want to know about them. I'm like, it's like, but you're in the bubble. She said, I want to be in the bubble. I'm happy to be in the bubble. And, you know, I just put that out there as, you know, I don't know. Very difficult. Soma, yes.
Thank you. Your artwork is lovely. So I
Thank
had
you
a
so much.
question about the two pictures you opened with. One said ecstatic truth, and I believe you said it was a German thinking. You know, there's a lot of that since you studied philosophy. A lot of that philosophy you may also find in Indian philosophy. They have the statement called Sat Chit Anand. Truth is bliss, which is truth is joyous. And perhaps Kant, I think, comes before Schopenhauer, because I think the German Schopenhauer beliefs come a lot from these Eastern philosophies. So you might find resonance in some of those philosophies. But I was really curious in what you wrote. You said, I believe, that geography is an indicator of personality, or some quote like
Destiny.
Destiny. So as she changed from wherever in Germany or where she came from and she ended up in New York, did her philosophy change? Is there a difference in her philosophy? Did you mark that?
Yeah, very much so. Yes. She was, so she fell in with the New York intellectuals. And, you know, again, I was kind of a fanboy of that scene. So this was another scene that I was really interested in, like the Cedar Bar and, you know, a lot of the painters and poets. And I think when she met certain people like Randall Jarrell, there was also a big German expat community in New York in publishing, and she became an editor at Schocken Books, and she was actually quite responsible for bringing Kafka to America. But she also had to, she liked America a lot in a kind of idealized way, and she had to deal with the fact that we didn't have a national language, and we didn't have you know, like I mean, maybe you could say English, but it was like, I think there's something about certain countries where like the language and the personality and everything are the same. And yeah, I think when she came here, some of the things, you know, I'm also just trying to do it as a storyteller, and I'm trying to figure out who was she before she was she? Who was Hannah Arendt before she was capital? And like, I found it very, very interesting. And I look for these little nuances. The first job she got was as an au pair for a family in Massachusetts. Now, could you imagine having Hannah as your au pair? The only quote that I got was she really hated it. And the thing she hated most about it was the awful American habit of having to smoke outside. I could just imagine. I mean, poor kids. I'd love to find them. But and her husband, who was also a great scholar, had to shovel plastics in a factory, and she lived on a fourth floor walk up. So she had that immigrant experience, and I think she had to fight her way up. So I show that. And actually she found a mentor at Columbia University who liked her provocative thinking and encouraged it. So it became a fertile soil for her. I think she was more able, for some reason in New York in those days, to piss people off and still get work, you know. So, sorry, I can't hear you.
Penelope?
That was fascinating. Thank you.
I'm glad you liked it. Yeah.
You mentioned her asking her mother early on at 11 or 12 for Kant and then learning Greek and the tragedies. What do you think got her there? I mean, I'm thinking or made her that way. I'm thinking about your discussion a few minutes ago with Barbara of whether people are capable of, everybody is capable of thinking. And that, let me just put in one more piece, of
Sure.
that. Shoma's nourishment projects, I think, are about thinking. And in her, I've had the delight and honor of attending many of her presentations. And when you see them, it's like that scene in When Harry Met Sally, where Carl Reiner's mother says, "I'll have what she's having." You want to have what Shoma's having because her joy in learning comes out. And that seems to be something that in American schools anyway, we do not regularly teach, that it's simply a joy to learn Greek or to learn about that flower or to learn about nematodes or whatever it is. It's joy. And it's separate from what job you have, what status you have, any of those things. I'm wondering how Hannah Arendt came to that.
Yeah. That's a great question. And in fact, I had a discussion with another biographer of recently. And, it's one of the mysteries. Is it nature or nurture? I mean, I think she had pretty great parents. I think she grew up in she did not know she was Jewish. It was a very, until that horrible incident where a kid yelled at her. And by the way, I also found that replicated when I was I was on a book tour and I was in, of all places, Fargo, North Dakota. I believe it's North Dakota. And the woman who was my host was a Mexican American, probably one of the only Mexican Americans in Fargo. And we were talking and she was saying, my son, because I was telling her about it, and she said, my son told everyone at school that he was Irish. His name is like, Rodriguez or something, because he likes leprechauns, and then someone in the school said, no, you're Mexican. And I thought, oh my God, that's the same thing that happened to Hannah. And I think that's a common experience. I don't know, was she a genius? Yes, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, I do think, Penelope, you really hit on something, this joy of learning. And there was something in her character. I think her parents, her mother, who actually, this was another thing that I wanted to put in the book that you don't often hear about, but it really struck me. Her mother slept with her everywhere, went around every place with her. I mean, her mother, you don't think of a philosopher as like, and her mother did not like her second husband at all. They didn't get along and they all had a room together. So I'm interested in that. So, but her mother was tremendous encouragement to her, made her feel like she could do anything. In fact, her mother said, if they ever say anything bad to you, you just let me know and I'll come take you out of school. And she said, my mom was taking me out of school so often, I was hardly in school at a certain point. And, one thing that Hannah Arendt was extremely, I guess that's a really great question, and I wish I could figure out the secret sauce of that. I guess I just sort of have to say that maybe, she was just an extremely special person, and we should look at it. She did get a lot of joy out of learning, and she was really curious. A lot of people might say she also was a little cold-hearted, maybe a bit of an elitist, a snob. She spoke too quickly, but she definitely got joy. And she was so curious, you see, that's the thing. She always wanted to, that's the way I pictured her, as somebody who always wanted answers, and she had parents that encouraged her. So what I was going to say, she was very, uh, she she was a great reader. So anything that she read, she got. Um, and she said that she was very, very specific about the difference between the private life, the social, the private world, the social world, and the public world. And she felt that in the private world, in our family, so important. So I think she really believed in affection and love, between people and families. But when it got to the political world, she said, no, 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 no emotion in politics. I saw what happened.
Yeah.
I saw what happened. No, not a lot of people had the courage to do that. Um, God, I mean, I also think so. When I was growing up, sort of, in high school and whatnot in the 70s, 60s and 70s, Germany didn't exist as a country. German history wasn't there. It was basically like there was Beethoven, who was American, da, 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 da. I mean, who an American had to write that. And then there was Devo. And there was like nothing in between. Not Devo, Kraftwerk. And there was nothing in between. It was no Goethe, no, none of this. It was all gone. It's all wiped off. There was quite an amazing culture in Germany, and it was pretty taken away. And I think she really was a beneficiary of that. But look at her, the like one of the only women. I mean, there was something going on there that made her a fighter. I don't know. I wish I knew the answer. What did she eat in her cereal?
Can,
It probably wasn't,
can,
it probably wasn't irrelevant that there was Kant on her family's bookshelf, and there was probably a Greek grammar as well. But today with the internet, every kid has Kant on the family bookshelf. So this kind of thing is accessible now to everyone.
Well, I think, when you mention this thing about joy, and I'll get to you in a second, Barbara. So as part of this, in my reading, like when I first started going into this, I went back to like a book. I was at Grinnell at a reunion, and I went to the bookstore, and they're getting ready to close it down. And I saw a book, Aristotle's Poetics, but translated by like some professor that I had who had long since retired. So I picked it up and I started reading it, and it was annotated and stuff. And one of the things I think that Aristotle said was that that learning things is like the greatest pleasure that people can have in life, like knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge. And if you think about it, I mean, just almost for anybody, like if you're a football player and you learn a new play, or if you're a gangster and you learn a new way to rob a bank. I mean, just the acquisition of knowledge is just a pleasurable thing. So she really leaned into that, to use that horrible expression. Barbara.
with the type of mind she had, was there an aloneness to her?
Yeah.
And when I look at that whole group of geniuses that she was part of, were they individual molecules of genius who were lucky to have found each other because they could talk to each other and understand what the other was saying, while normal people would get glassy-eyed listening to them? What was the meilleur?
Oh, hard to say. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, in the book, I talk about the Romanische and what was going on. And if you think about it, physics was, the universe was being, I mean, these people did not shy away from asking the big questions. You know, for whatever reason, at the, you know, Heidegger, what is, you know, Einstein, why is time, you know, time and space and matter, you know, people asking questions about anthropology, sociology, language, even this pursuit among this sort of secularized German Jewish people, like going into the Kabbalah, you know, and Jewish, like everything was being re-examined. And, you know, there was a, you know, there were airplanes for the first time, movies. Um, I think they were on a high level. I think they, you know, I mean, they did work on a very, but also if you look at what was happening, um, after the First World War, they thought they had seen the end of civilization. I mean, and that's where everything was just like, you know, let's tear it all down and build it all up again. And I thought that just a super interesting milieu. But you had to probably fight for your way to a certain seat at the table. I'm sure there was that. So as Alan, you know, I tried to show some of that just, you know, I mean, here's an example, and I'm, rather than making any, you know, I'm just trying to show the story of the times, and then you kind of like make up your own conclusion. I'm just trying to chronicle it, but I want to show it to people in a way like comic books do, you know, Anthony, like maybe where, you know, you got, you know, the Hulk, you know, one of those great early, you know, where you know, you feel all the moving parts in such an interesting way. And I was trying to do that with this scene. So I wanted to show a little bit about the decadence of Weimar and what was happening. And I was kind of interested in this whole notion of, I don't know, syphilis and all this stuff, you know, because about her father. And I just had this thought, and this is the wonder of the internet. I just thought, something in my mind is that I'm just betting that a German Jew invented the condom. I don't know. I have this feeling, you know, it seemed like something a German Jew would have invented, you know, because there were all these German uh, healthcare companies and, you know, the German army, and boy, if they got syphilis, you know, whatever. So I did some research, and in no time I found out that, yes, sure enough, a German Jew, actually a Polish refugee, an incredible story deserving of its own novel, uh, went to night school in Berlin, learned basic chemistry, and invented the condom called Frum. His name was Frum, From, Mr. Frum. In fact, the names of the condoms was called the Frum's Act. And that became almost a byword for having sex. You know, did you do the Frum? You know, whatever. And then, and he was part of, you know, and I envisioned him as being part of this scene because everything was being invented. And an interesting ancillary thing to that, and again, I just put these out there maybe in a footnote because it's like, I want to look at the whole society. The first thing that the Nazis did when they had power was they took over Frum's factory, threw him out, and gave it to Hermann Goering's mother as a gift. So, and Frum had to go to London, a broken man, his fortune taken from him, and then he died. And so there was great things happening and terrible things happening. But there are people there, you know, I think there was, you know, like any society there, I mean, at that time, I believe Berlin had, and this is when Billy Wilder was coming up, Samuel Billy Wilder, and a lot of the people who had, there were 130 daily newspapers in Berlin. Now, that's insane. There were 130 daily printed newspapers. Some had, I believe, 3, maybe 4 editions. Remember newspapers? But that was like incredible. So it was a very unique world. Yeah, Alexander. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Actually, I was just wanted to know about your process, and I was interested that when Alan was asking you to talk about footnotes, you know, and I was thinking about you as a storyteller, and you went back into your onto your screen. And you were quite apologetic because it was kind of fairly chaotic. And it was
Yes,
quite
I'm
hard.
sorry. I have it somewhere on here, but I have 1,000 screens open.
No, I love that. I love that. And I thought, and it seemed quite, I was wondering if that was kind of symbolic in a way of how you create stories, because in a way it's not a lateral process. It's not a linear process. It's
No,
quite
it's not.
lateral.
It's
And I was
not.
kind of, and in a way that to me was quite a kind of an insight into how
Let me show you. Here, I'll give you guys an insight.
Mhm.
So the next book I'm working on, there, little sneak preview, Einstein. And so I found this book written by Philip Frank, Einstein, His Life and Times. And this was a friend of Einstein's. And it was published before Einstein died. And it's fabulous. Now, the problem is you read a lot of things and a lot of it's rubbish and a lot of it's whatever, but occasionally you hit something and it really, really, really is great. So I'm going through, and so it is a very iterative process. I will go through books and I will mark them up. Then the second thing I do, you can see I'm sort of doing it. If it's good enough, it gets put into a little notebook. Like if it's interesting enough to get off the page, or I'll go back through and I'll take everything I circled and I'll throw it into a notebook. And then once I filled the notebooks, I'll go through the notebooks and I'll circle anything that's like still good enough. And then if it makes it through the circle test, I mean, I've got notebooks around here from the current book that I'm working on somewhere. It makes it to note cards. But on the note card, it has to be done with a big fat black marker pen. So it has to be just like a short bullet point of a something, you know, boy yells at, you know, Hannah, whatever. And then, and at the same time, I'm trying to find the character and the tension that will drive the story and create an overall plan, if you will, for how I will tell the story and the tone that I think it might want to have that's different. I want to do something different. Like there's probably, I said, there are more biographies of Einstein than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So why would the world need another one? So I have to like ask myself, what the hell am I going to say about Einstein that nobody has said? And one of my methods is to find these peculiar incidents. There was one incident in Hannah Arendt, and there is in everybody's, I would argue, probably in everybody's life, if you look into it, that I still can't figure. And there are many, but there's one that really flummoxed me. And I was reading the standard biography, and there was a scene, and you'll remember it, Alan, from the book, where late in her life, so handwriting analysis of all things had become a big thing post-war. Everybody was into handwriting analysis, and they were and strangely, the experts in handwriting analysis seemed to be Eastern European Jewish women were the experts for some reason. There was some woman who taught a course at the New School that sold out. It was the biggest course ever on how to do handwriting analysis. And she was in the circle of Hannah Arendt. And in fact, the wife of the elite German publisher, Schaken, in New York, had become an acolyte, a follower, a disciple of handwriting analysis. And she had a handwriting analysis party, so to speak, at their apartment. And the entertainment was going to be bring a letter in, unsigned, and she will perform handwriting analysis on it. Hannah brought two, which completely mystified me. It's in the book, but I'll tell you, because I could never countenance this, but this made it actually into the biography. And this question, the first was the woman looked at it and said, oh, this man was, you know, had a lot of doubts and and he'll probably take his own life. And it was Walter Benjamin who did, and was a great friend of hers and did take his own life. And Hannah was so shocked by this that she pulled out the second one. unmarked. And the woman read it and she did an analysis of it. And this is a guy who wants to be surrounded by a lot of men. He thinks this, he thinks that, he mistrusts. It was Heidegger. And Hannah asked two questions, and the answer never came. And one of them was this person homosexual? And I found that, like, what? It didn't make any sense to me that this uber rational person would have brought a letter from her paramour, whatever, and then ask, was he homosexual? So, as I try and find those little moments that are just huge
But
questions.
what I would say is there may have been moments in their relationship that she was questioning.
I would say every moment in their relationship.
Okay.
Yeah. Joseph.
Yeah, that was a really fantastic presentation. Thank you. I loved your book. I'm one of those people that came to graphic novels via the movie 300.
Sure.
And so that's when I first heard about graphic novels. I've since seen it in performance art. There was a Shostakovich graphic novel that went with the performance of Shostakovich. And I remember going out of performance and learning how to produce video for television, actually. And some of the best advice I got was, don't do in a video what you can do in a performance. Don't do in a book what you can do in a video. Don't do in a painting what you can do in water. Know your medium. And you have this very unique medium of graphic novels. And as I'm thinking of the other graphic novels that I admire and that I know, they are so chock full of historical information that you would otherwise never, ever see in one place, ever be interested enough to read through, engaged enough, caught up in the story. So I wonder what you think about the format of a graphic novel as doing something that other formats cannot do, that it's really got a thing that's special.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sorry, Anthony, that I didn't share the correct screen and I have all my comic books upstairs. But one of the things I talked about was when I was a kid, my dad's cousin, who was very young, he was like the youngest one, gave me his entire collection of classic illustrated comic books.
Oh, nice.
And the classic illustrated comic books were nonfiction. Well, they either took, novels, and most of them were kind of weird novels like Tom Brown's School Days and stuff, but some of them were really good. But there was a line of them that were called The World Around Us, and they were nonfiction, and they did World War II and whatever. And I used to read them over and over and over and over again. And subsequently, I found out that the woman who was behind them, someone who I maybe someday we'll do something on, her name was Roberta Strauss Freulich. And she was fascinating in itself. I mean, she was a child of Yiddish socialists in the Bronx, and she went to City College, and the only job she could get was sort of as a typist at a comic book company. And she rose to become editor, and then she became a historian. And her last book was a 1986. I just bought it for a lot of fairly amount of money, but I needed to have it. Was called The Fate of the Jews, and it was in 1985-86, basically saying Israel is a horrible, messed up state. I mean, it was so ahead of its time that it was actually, it got one great review, and then they woke up to it, and it was just squashed. It was crunched. And Strauss Freulich was the person, she wrote about Sacco and Vanzetti, who was the editor behind all these great books. But more to the point, there's something about when you read a comic, and I often say, even if it's like a Bazooka Joe, those little things you get in the gum, you transport into it. There's something about seeing the pictures and the words together.
You used that word transport earlier. I think it's a really interesting word.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that, but that's how I see it. And I mean, I don't know about you, but when I look at pictures of you guys right now, I'm getting so much information, not just from the books and the thing, but the way you look, and this is how we as humans look at the world, you know? So, and then, you know, I've got dozens of them uh, around my office, obviously. There are no rules. So for instance, if I want to break the fourth wall and all of a sudden have have it go into recipes, I can do that. Like if I think it's important to know Hannah Arendt's mother's Hamantaschen recipe at this particular moment, I just throw it in there. You know, I was talking to some biographers and they were, you know, what would you call straight up, you know, biographers that write words. And I was intimidated because there were like Pulitzer Prize winners and stuff there. And they were envious of me because they said, you don't have to do any of that transitional stuff that we do. You can just like go to a new picture.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Hey, Merle.
I appreciate that.
This is fascinating to me. In addition to what you've told us about her, I have to confess I'm not very well versed in the whole genre of graphic novels. So my question is, why don't you call this a graphic biography?
Well, I think people might think that it's all sexy then, you know, it's graphic, you know, whatever. Because you know, the language, I've been struggling with it. My editor won't call it comics, and it's not a novel. There's a woman who's quite a big writer, and she's a reviewer, and she says that we should call it graphic narrative. But it's really a kind of an in-between space. I think it's most akin to theater in that you witness it and it's action, but you can digress very quickly into narrative. And, you know, Anthony, I mean, you're a big comics fan. I'm just curious, like, let me ask you, I mean, what's the, for lack of a better word, what's the vibe that you get from reading a good comic of any kind? Like, what would be a favorite comic that you like? And it doesn't have to be a graphic novel, like one that, like, I'm always looking for great Marvel and DC stories because I read them, but I didn't really appreciate them. But like, what do you?
Right. I mean, usually it's something you want to go back and reread and experience again, or
Experience.
something that you take something, you know, visceral from. And you know, it could be a graphic novel, it could be, you know, Watchmen or The Dark Knight Returns or something like that, or it could be, I mean, certainly Mouse probably impacted a lot of people, you know, the same way. The term graphic novel, yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because it's the fictional element is inherent in there, but it's like, I guess any other visual, yeah. I don't know if you have to kind of separate the two. I mean, it's.
Yeah. I mean, just to get back to you, Merle, for a second, I mean, some of the strongest work in this genre, whatever you want to call it, and I know Chris Ware and others call it comics, but unfortunately for a lot of people who aren't into the scene, they have a bad name to it, comics. But some of the strongest work is autobiographical or memoir. Fun Home, memoir. Mouse, kind of a memoir. Persepolis, you know, memoir. First person narrative.
Now, your work reminds me of Be Here Now a little bit.
Oh, well, that I'll have to check that out.
So is the answer to the question that if it's graphic, whether it's fiction, biography, memoir, it still is the acceptable umbrella term is graphic novel?
I mean, I think so. I mean, it's the most well known, but my sense is that a novel is a made up story.
Yeah.
And these aren't completely made up, although, you know, now you're getting into pretty, I mean, you can read, there was a great quote, I don't have it at hand, from Nabokov, and he was talking about, you know, people say sometimes my writing copies from the world. I think the world copies from my writing, you know, so where do you, yeah, Penelope?
You mentioned that the owner of, is it Quimby's?
Quimby's, yeah.
Said that there were people who didn't want to, didn't have any interest in approaching graphic novels, and she didn't want to know them.
Right.
My book club, which has been in existence for over 35 years, was in that category, and I talked them into reading Persepolis.
Hmm.
And because I was responsible for talking them into it, it was my task to present it to them. And one of the things now I learned about graphic novels in it that I thought was interesting. I mean, when you read a regular print book, you are essentially getting input to your left brain. You are getting words that come in. Now, there may be some information in what typography is used or how it's done on the page, but mostly it's the words that come to you. Whereas the graphic novel gets to communicate with you on two levels at once. It gets to communicate with you with words, and Persepolis in particular uses both the words with the classic, cloud
Yeah.
above the character and also notes underneath the images. So you get sort of two voices at once, which is interesting. But it also is the pictures themselves. How are they portrayed? What size are they? Does it take up the whole page, or is it a little one on part of the page?
That's right.
What angle? All of these things are communicating with you directly at the same time. Sometimes you're explicitly conscious of it, and sometimes you're not. But the fact is, it's communicating to that nonverbal side of you as well at the same time, which is a very powerful medium when you think about it. Part of it depends on what the message is, whether you think it has value or not, or how well it's done. Just side note, I had a great comic book collection. And
Your mom threw them all away. That's my mom threw all mine away.
I gave them to Children's Memorial Hospital.
Well, that's good.
And they were very welcome, but I was not allowed to have Classics Illustrated. And I wasn't allowed to have violent ones either, but the Classics Illustrated was that it would spoil the real thing for me if I read the Three Musketeers in Classics Illustrated form. But this is just sort of a paean to the value of graphic novels, of that medium per se, and it's done very differently. Heaven knows Mouse communicates at a nonverbal level as well as at a verbal level, and the best of them seem to do that. That's it.
Is any part of it that makes them compelling is that some part of the narrative is nonlinear?
A lot. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I mean, I think you have to, maybe to Alexander, what his question was, and this is so hard for me because, when I set out to do, I have done comics for the New Yorker, so I understand how to do like a one panel cartoon. And I've done ads, and I've written television commercials and I've directed them and stuff. And I tried doing graphic novels before. And usually what happens is I sit down before this one, I sit down and I draw and I have like 3 amazing pages and then it gets completely boring and I want to throw it away. So I had to figure out how to build real storytelling into it, with a kind of hooks and clues and things. I just read and devoured, quite frankly, George Saunders' new book about reading the Russian literature. It's fantastic. I mean, I reread Chekhov. I mean, it's just incredible. But he talks even in Chekhov, which it seems as if nothing is happening, and it's like watching paint dry. Actually, everything is happening. So, this is the difficult thing. So my next book, which I'll share the screen and show you the cover of, since I did kind of sneak that before, So When I Grow Up, the lost autobiographies of 6 Yiddish teens. And I kind of did the cover. It's based on some of my paintings and stuff. But basically what happened was I read an article in the New York Times and they had discovered these autobiographies and I knew I wanted to do them, but I didn't know what the story was going to be. And I didn't want it to just be boring. And it took me a really, really long time, I think, to somewhat, solve the way that'll keep people asking what happens next. And, but I do think pictures are just, picture stories. Even when you read, I think Penelope makes a really great point. I mean, like I've been on a Nabokov thing and I finally, read the annotated version of Lolita, which was incredible. And he's, of course, just an incredible stylist. I mean, the man is just, he's just like an acrobat with words, but he paints pictures, in your mind too, but they're coming in through words. And something about seeing an image, as stupid or banal or great as that image can be, we just cathect to it. We just connect to it. We project ourselves to images. Yes, Soma.
Actually, this is one comment for Anthony. I wanted to make sure I told you from your presentation about a few months ago, you had talked, it's a lovely way that you share your comics with your daughter. And that's how you sometimes connect. It sticks with me because when my children come up and tell me about their, what is it now, Wanda Vision and all this
Oh, great show. Yes. Terrific.
Oh my God, if you hadn't put that connection that, it's a way for you to connect with your children, I would have walked out. Now I sit through it, thank God, because I realized this is a nice way of connecting with my children and making memories. So you made an impression on my motherhood. My children are better off for it. So I wanted to make sure I thank you for it. So I pay attention to the comics when they talk about it because they're engrossed with Wanda and Agatha and all these stuff. So I learned that from you. So your salons, Berber, make me a better mother. And I got a while. So that's one. The other thing was when Ken is talking about, and I think I love the point that Penelope brought up, you can get so many, I like Persepolis, but I find comics, and I'm specifically talking comics because there's I think a great British cartoonist, Ronald Searle, he just died a few years ago.
Sure.
His work is on war, like a lot of his old work, the Burmese War. It's much easier. I found it much easier to learn about something that is so harrowing through comics. It makes it more an easier entrance. And then when you're comfortable, not comfortable, when you know a little bit more about it, you can go read more about the really graphic details. I think it's a very easier way to step into something that is so horrific. Even Persepolis isn't all happy, jolly, anything at all. So it's just a nicer, softer medium into stepping into something so horrific. I think they have a great purpose.
I happen to have this right next to me, and this is an image. This is from an issue of the Comics Journal, and there's an incredible French artist named Jacques Tardy. And here's something, he did something on World War I. I mean, look at the imagery. And, what it does is it might be too horrific. It's sort of mediated, but it allows you to get closer.
It's a aesthetic distance.
Yeah, I think, and look, Alan is, who I think is hopefully still here. Alan is an expert on photography. And I think, you could speak to the difference between like just a picture of some horrors of war versus one of the people that you may, photographs that you may have of someone who puts some of those, because I think you have some pictures of war in your collection, but somebody who then puts it through an artistic sensibility, because just to show like horror unmediated is a different experience. What's the difference there? Because I think that's a good term. Like even with a photograph, which is supposed to be so real.
Well, that's the problem, is because it looks real, but it obviously isn't real. And so it's like the difference between radio and television. If with radio you can hear things, then you fill in the picture with your mind. Whereas in if you have a very horrific image, um, it it defines the space in a way that's very different than if you have a drawing that allows your input. I don't know if that makes any sense, but you know what I'm saying? That it's the more specific an image is, it can be more shocking, but it leaves less room for you to get into it because it's too real. Whereas if you have something that is like the thing you just showed, you know, with like the skull, you know, embracing the soldier, if you saw that actual photograph, you would be so repulsed, you really couldn't look at it. But by doing it with a line drawing like that, it provides you two things. One is a safe space, and then the other is the room for your imagination to make it even potentially more horrible than if it was the direct image itself.
Yeah, and it has a lot to do with you know, I was watching some stuff about comedians. And the thing about comedians is they, if you look at the content of what a lot of comedians talk about, it's pretty horrible stuff. It's like, you know, self-loathing and, you know, just terrible, but they present it in a charming fashion. And, you know, jokes, you know, when I do stuff with cartoons, I, you know, when they work at their best, they show a dark truth that we may all share, but in a way that's kind of appealing. Like I remember, and we laugh at it. It's that laugh of recognition. So for instance, Charles Addams, who's one of my very, very favorite cartoonists,
Absolutely.
dealt with the most macabre subjects,
Yeah.
but he did it in such a charming way. You know, I'm one of his is, you know, a husband's trying to commit suicide and he's hung himself, horrible thing, right? In the parlor, but his arm is stuck and he's still alive. And his wife walks in and goes, "Can't you do anything right?" You know, so it's like, it takes a dark, dark place and it makes it accessible. Whereas maybe what you're saying is if it's just something horrible, we would just turn away from it and we wouldn't know what to do.
You know, the Far Side
Well,
cartoons.
right.
Yeah.
But,
So,
you know, but in terms of like, you know, horrific photographs, I once had to do did a slideshow about Don McCullen's work, who was a phenomenal war photographer. And so this was in the days of slides, right? So I had to have the copy stand and the camera and the book, and I had to make slides, one after the other, after the other, after the other, where each one was a devastating image. And by concentrating all of that, I mean, I was like sick for a week. It really, you know, it really can get to you. So it's the sequencing of the images. It's not just the individual power. I mean, it's the way that one follows the other, and then how whenever you sequence images, it's you in your mind that fills in that space between one image and the next.
And I think it's a kind of, I've said this in some other things, like because of the phone and the Instagram and all this stuff, I mean, not, you know, we live in a more probably visually acute era than many. And Alan, I know you probably have to deal with, because I work with a lot of professional photographers and they're like, we hate, you know, filters, you know, any idiot can like take a camera and then throw some filters on it and all of a sudden it looks like it's a good picture.
Yeah.
But you know what? It looks like it's a good picture.
Yeah.
And
Not a good picture. Yeah.
and you know, this is a troubling issue that I have with Hannah Arendt and life in general. Is it okay to admit that some things are better than others?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Well, and Barbara, I knew you would come out on that.
I mean, one of the things, because I have been a photographer too, and when I've got the time and I'm looking at something I've photographed in the scene, and now I can look at that elephant because I got the basic picture and I can explore. I'm always saying to myself, what am I not seeing? What's in this scene that I'm not seeing, and can I find it and can I photograph it? It's not always there, and it's not always dynamic, and it's not all pictures are worth taking. So, but it's an exploration.
But it's hard to, the older I get, the more I'm comfortable being an elitist. Yeah, so even though I'm basically a socialist, but somehow or other, there's a war between those two, where yeah, I mean, my other love is Gilbert and Sullivan, right? So there's a wonderful, what can I say? There's a wonderful line in, I think it's in Utopia Limited, but I'm not sure, where it's, if everybody is somebody, nobody is anybody.
Right. Lake Wobegon, where all children are above average,
Got boring after a while.
It's interesting how things change, though. I was just, I won't get too deep into it, but I was reading or something about some critic from the 1950s who was very august, he picked all the books for the Book of the Month Club, and he picked the things that got the Pulitzer Prize. He's one of those dead white males, from the 1950s who went to Harvard or Yale and picked everything. And one thing he hated was comics. He hated comic books. I'd love to do a comic book about him.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if anyone would buy it, but it's funny how things turn. And a couple of years ago, not to name drop, but we were in Greece and I had to go see the Parthenon, and we went to go look at the Parthenon, and I looked at and then I had to go to London at the end of the trip to see all the other parts of the Parthenon that weren't at the Parthenon, all the good parts. But the frieze on the Parthenon is a graphic novel. I mean, and in fact, in the day it was in color. So
Right.
we get all like highfalutin about it, and it was a frickin', this horse walked and then this guy fell off it and he had a sword, and it probably wasn't even as good as much of the stuff that Anthony reads. I think Stan Lee probably was better than but in our language, our words may come from pictures. So who knows, if you get deep into sociology. I once heard an apocryphal story that I thought was so funny, and it stayed with me forever, that Picasso could only count to 7 because every time he hit 8, it reminded him of a serpent and he couldn't go any further. I don't know if it's true or not, but I want to believe it. Yeah.
Anthony?
Was there any episode or aspect of her life that got cut out or that you wanted to include and weren't able to?
A lot. I mean, there was a lot. I mean, there was a whole, but there was there was a relationship, but they were more intellectual relationships. I tried to show most of the incidents, and then, here, kind of as we're wrapping up, because you'll note the title of the book is The Three Escapes of Hannah Arendt. I mean, that was a shameless throwdown to make it seem like it was an adventure story, because what is more visually compelling than watching someone escape from something? So I tried to show things that had visual, appeal. But yeah, there were a lot of things. And oh boy, the false starts. Alexander, you might find it. I mean, the original way that I wanted to get into it was I wanted to make an imaginary encounter between Hannah Arendt and Irving Berlin in the Orient Express. Because Irving Berlin actually traveled with his car and his piano and through Europe. And I thought, wow, emigre, Russian, Tin Pan Alley, idiot savant, genius, and Hannah Arendt, be very interesting. Then I threw that out because that was ridiculous. That didn't work. Then I wanted to I wanted to bring Allen Ginsberg in. Although there was no actual evidence, they could have very well known each other because they were in a lot of the same places. And Auden that didn't work. I didn't want to deal with anything to do after she got to America because I thought the whole Eichmann thing had been done, but I couldn't. I had to deal with that. And I wanted to dodge the bullet and make it young Abraham Lincoln, young Hannah Arendt. No, I couldn't do that. My editor wouldn't let me. So, these things, they morph and go through you try different ways in, and you throw out a lot of stuff. I mean, actually, one of the ways that I first got into it was I was trying to do something about um, what's his name? This philosopher at the University of Chicago, Leo Strauss. And Hannah Arendt was just a side little piece, because evidently he hit on her, and she turned him down because they were all students together. And I met the guy at the University of Chicago, ran the Leo Strauss Center, and we had lunch. And he said, "You're not going to ask me about the time that Hannah spurned Leo Strauss. We get like 10 calls a year on that." And I'm like, "No, I'm not." And then I found out that Hannah was just like my soul sister, like everything that she was into. So yeah, you take a lot of.
But being a good editor, being a good writer, being fine at whatever we pursue, is that elitist, Alan?
Sure.
But is there anything wrong with being elitist?
No, it's only if you lord it over other people.
I agree.
That's a whole other discussion, because it also has to do with, there are various criteria by which one judges Western European art, and there are other criteria by which one might look at Indian art or Chinese or African or any.
It's such a huge hole. I mean,
Yeah.
when Soma brought that up, I mean, there are probably some philosophers of the Western tradition who knew more or less about Eastern philosophy, but not a lot. I'm not as much. Maybe they stole from it. I don't know. It's something that, and look, everybody makes mistakes. I mean, Saul Bellow was notorious for, what did he say there? I mean, he said something like, "There's no war and peace of the Zulus," or something horrible.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I think, look, that's his prerogative. But I think the smaller that we make our world, this is where I get back to that Hannah vision of plurality. The smaller that we make our world, the less real it is, and the more screwed up we are. And I guess I'll sort of conclude, if I could, and I love you guys amazingly, but I've got to sort of recapture a little bit of my day before my wife poisons me. No, that's safe space. She would never do that. But I do think we have to try and get to those uncomfortable or unusual. And that's what art hopefully kind of does. And we can disagree. And we certainly should disagree. I think, in fact, I love disagreement. Just as long, as it's about the work. As I say, it's about the work. When I teach, it's about the work. It's never about the person. It's a very, very hard place to be in.
And the problem is it's gotten so personal.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, that, as somebody said, that's a huge other conversation. But the other thing I would finally say at the end is, this book is not supposed to be a be all and end all. And I don't think Hannah should come back to Leo Strauss. One of the great differences, and they're both students of Heidegger. Strauss was the kind of guy, and I try and get into the character. So Strauss was the kind of guy that had acolytes, followers, light my cigarette, carry my briefcase, do my thing, thousands of people. Hannah had no followers. That's why she wouldn't teach. She wouldn't take a full-time position. She hated intellect. She was intellectual, but she didn't like that. So I think it's like we all have to forge out there. And in the book is a provocation. And if you read what she wrote when she was the first Jew to be accepted back to Germany to win this very, like, their version of the Pulitzer Prize, the Lessing Prize, she basically said, look at what Lessing said. I'm just trying to throw bombs out there and get people talking, so I don't know if that's a good conclusion or a bad one. Just read more graphic novels. Write more. Check my book out. Tell your friends. We should make a list of things that people read that they like, because I'm always looking for stuff, especially you, Anthony. I want to know it, or anyone, Alexander, anybody who's in. I'm always looking for. I mean, one thing about this field is it's growing, and there are all kinds of interesting voices coming from all places, as we know, Alan, our friend in India, and yeah, I mean,
I knew nothing about graphic novels before him. This was in the Following the Box exhibit. We had Shora Bosen, who is a graphic novelist, and he did a graphic novel interpretation of the 1945 photographs, you know, that we found at the garage sale. And that opened my eyes. It was just incredible. And then we went to Quimby's when he was here.
well, and the other thing that's kind of cool about it is they're a heck of a lot cheaper to make than movies.
Mhm.
You know?
But the other thing is making sure that and maybe it's by people like us reading them and talking about them. Boy, that was an elitist thing to say, wasn't it? But anyway, I'll finish the thought. Is that graphic novels must not get put into a box of people who are unable to read print novels. That they must be understood as a choice as opposed to the person. I mean, we have all seen people, perhaps, well, I certainly have, reading comics and running their finger along the words as they read, because clearly that is the best thing they can read. Their reading capabilities are not great, but graphic novels are something quite separate from that.
Well,
That is their potential audience is way bigger than people who cannot read a pure print book.
but let me just push back a little bit, with all due respect to whoever told you not to read Classics Illustrated.
My mother
I
Um,
love them.
No, but
Wasn't
the,
allowed.
the point is it's not a zero sum. It's like you can read both. You can enjoy the graphic novel of the Three Musketeers and then read the real novel, and they're both great. You know, it's like uh, just because you like movies doesn't mean you can't go to see plays anymore. You know, it's like I think reading is reading. I can't tell you my first book, actually, that little first book that came out, and I pretty much learned how to read from reading comics. I'm not afraid to admit it.
Me too.
That was the first time I ever really got into like, and by the way, I would put some of the great writers of comic books and Joanna Strauss-Froelich and others up against any, because the condensation of what they have to do to say in a small amount, you know, pretty great, pretty great. So I think, yeah, I will be an elitist too from the point of view of an artist. And I just don't know if artists want to create work that's not their best.
Right.
So if artists create what they consider to be their best, it's up to critics and the public to do it. I don't think people, you know, are like, if yes, there's certain times when all I want is like potato chips, and sometimes I want to have wonderful French fries with, like, you know, Gruyere sauce, and sometimes I just want to have, you know, it's like, but I do think that the thing that I hope to do is that you can tell serious stories. You can tell, it's not you can provoke people in real ways, and if somebody is provoked in a real way so that they feel something real, who cares? I mean, who cares how it gets to them?
I
But
was always very grateful to the classic comic books because then I didn't have to read the originals.
well, that too.
My mother's point exactly, Barbara.
But
And
it
and
didn't
and and, and then
it
as a
didn't
final thing,
keep me
if you,
from being a reader.
Penelope, at the end of every classic, I've noticed now, as I told Anthony that I'm going back through them, they have put a little thing in and said, now that you read the classic, go to your library and read the real one. How many people do you think did that? Not a lot.
Not
But
many.
sometimes for me, you know, yeah, I mean, there's no simple answer. It just, if it's good, it's like Duke Ellington said, there is no such thing as, you know, there's just good music and bad music. That's it.
Right.
So you guys have been awesome. I hope someday to see you again.
Thank you.
We'll make sure it happens, Kim. Thank you, thank you,
Yeah, well,
thank
next year.
you.
And send me the video and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Will do.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye
everybody.
all. Love you.
Love you.
Shama, I've got feathers.
Oh, I saw that. I'm going to stop by this week. Barbara,
Okay.
I wanted to tell you, I'm sorry I couldn't make the horse presentation because I really wanted to see it. You know, the one horse presentation done by the.
Right, I watched it after the fact.
Because because I had a presentation at 10 that day, so I was panicking before. I'm gonna go watch it because I thought it looked so interesting.
It
Thanks.
was, and I
Perfect.
sent it to my friend Jay, who was my guide and who was a great rider and came from a Rajput family, so he enjoyed that.
I'm gonna go. Thank you for making me aware. I'm gonna go look at it.
Hi, Anu.
Hi guys, I just wanted to say hello before you leave. I was listening to the whole thing, but I know my video was off. How are you?
Good. What about you?
Very good, very good. We actually got very lucky and got vaccinated. You know,
Right.
UIC had open enrollment for a while.
Oh, fabulous.
So feeling better about that. We went to
Yeah,
Florida.
have you had both shots?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. You know, it was so weird because we didn't really fit into any of the categories. So I thought it was a scam, but they weren't asking for any personal information. So I told Arjun, let's sign up. If it's not genuine, we'll come back. But we went there and it was fabulously set up. You know, it was like a assembly line. They were checking you in and we were in and out of there in 20 minutes. So
I mean,
later
this
on
has been such a weird and yet to be concluded rollout. You know,
Yeah.
in Yiddish, we would say it's a shanda because it's just, we're better than this, but we're finding out we're not.
I know. Shoma, did your parents get the second shot?
They are scheduled for the second shot. Thanks for asking. March
Oh.
1st, so tomorrow.
Oh,
Good.
good.
Getting it
Good.
at the same place at Walmart. So thank you for trying to help me.
Oh,
It's-
not at
Anna
all.
was trying to help me find a place, and she had found a place by Indiana. My dad said, "I'm not driving there." Back to the point before. So we found back in Walmart.
You know, Barbara, this was the other place so many people were going. One of my friends is chief of staff at an Indiana hospital. And he said, we have shots every evening because people didn't show up for their appointments. So he said, if you put your name down, we start calling people that we now have this inventory. And if you want to drive here, which is, you know, it's the next state, but it's just over the border. So it was
Right.
a 40-minute drive. So quite a lot of people went and got it there. So,
You know,
where
and
was the
I was lucky because out of the blue, I hadn't even focused on this. I get a text on, say, a Tuesday night from my arthritis doc who does volunteer work out at 111th at Roseland Hospital. And she says, Barbara, a shot became available. Do you want it? I said, I'll be there.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jack was dear and drove me out. And then he was able to arrange for the next week for Michael to get it. So it was kind of worth his while.
Yeah.
And it was totally surprising. Didn't have to do any work. I watched the rest of you having shots canceled, you know, scrambling all over the place.
I read in the New York Times today, 1/3 of the military is turning it down. Can you believe it?
I have come in my senior years to believe anything. It's kind of, I'm shocked, but not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my physician friends are saying the doctors almost without exception took it. A lot of the nurses did, but then a good 20 to 30% of the support staff, nurses, aides, kitchen workers, janitorial staff, they all, good 30% of them refused it.
Are they waiting? Is it because they thought it was developed too quickly?
I think there's suspicion about that. I think like some of the people I spoke to just feel, if they're young, if they're under 30 and healthy, they feel I will 99.9% be okay. So I don't really want to take it. And then I think, Barbara, as you've been reading with some of the minority communities, there's just suspicion.
Oh, the
about it.
histories are horrendous.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll all be able to get together. You let me
Oh
know,
my
guys.
God.
Tell me when you feel safe and we'll do something at our place.
That would be wonderful.
Okay. All right. Good to see you
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
Love you all.
Bye.